Oh, good Friday morning to you sports fans. It's your friend Joseph Craven here on 40 Minutes of Hell. Basically, an apt description of the podcast, how it feels to listen to the podcast, and also a nice little basketball reference. That was not the smoothest entrance I've ever done, but whatever. This is the Friday Fast Break. This is where it's, if you're new to the program, the Fast Break is just a little bit more, what's it called? Stream of consciousness sort of episode. It's not quite as detailed, planned out as some of the other episodes, especially those that have like big discussions I have with somebody, such as the finals preview episode I did with a friend of the program and personal friend, Gray Barnes, earlier in the week. If you missed that one, go back and listen to it. We talked a little bit about what it would take for Toronto to actually challenge the Warriors. And now that we are one game in, we've actually seen some of those elements work out for Toronto against the Golden State Warriors, which is pretty cool. I woke up this morning with a splitting headache and realized that I have not had coffee in about 48 hours. And we've never been this way before. But it looks like finally in this, my 31st year of life, I have developed that classic adulthood coffee/caffeine addiction and went through some minor withdrawals yesterday and today. So, hooray. Anyway, I'm sipping some nice, fresh brew, and I'm ready to chat a little bit about Game 1 of the NBA Finals. As you well know, the Toronto Raptors, by the way, if you've never been to the city of Toronto, you may not know this, but residents of Toronto do not hit that second tee. Well, not often. I'm sure there's some of them that do. I'm sure it's one of those things where like people have weird opinions on it. Like if you're there, you maybe feel strongly that you don't hit the second tee. Maybe you feel strongly that you do. But the ones that I've known do not hit the second tee in Toronto. In fact, they even referenced this in the movie Argo. Won Best Picture a few years back. Great movie. I was a big fan of it. But they're trying to pose as Canadians from Toronto, and they make the reference in there that if you're from Toronto, you don't say Toronto, you say Toronto, which I think is very interesting, being, of course, from Mississippi, where most of the time we drop like 3/4 of the letters that are in a word anyway as we're speaking. But Toronto is one of my favorite cities on the planet. And also because of that, I have a bit of a soft spot for the Toronto Raptors because when they were established back in, was it 95 or 96? Anyway, when they were established, I was still, as a kid, about 95, 96 would have made me either 7 or 8 years old. I was still pretty obsessed with Jurassic Park at that point in time. And dinosaurs in general. That was my childhood obsession that has continued to this day. I will fight you if you say anything bad about Jurassic Park. If you say something bad about Jurassic World, that's okay. We can discuss that. But all that being said, I thought it was cool that we had freaking dinosaurs as a mascot in the NBA. I thought the purple color scheme was neat. The purple and red. I thought it was a unique color scheme. Still kind of feel that way. You don't see that very often in sports. So, there's that. If you ask Paul Lucas of UniWatch, he's going to have his own opinions about the color purple, and that's totally fine with me. I like that he does. I like UniWatch, by the way, if you're not familiar with them. It's a really cool website, really cool account. So anyway, all that being said, it's cool to see Toronto make the finals. It's cool to see Jurassic Park, the fan zones that they've set up across the city of Toronto. It's cool to see the passion of a fan base there in truly a world city. I mean, that is a place where you go and you meet people from all walks of life, all areas of the planet that have congregated in this one particular gorgeous, fun, massive city. Really cool to see that. That being said, I've only been out to the Bay Area once in my life. It was for a friend's wedding just a few years ago, and I had a blast. So don't make me or don't get it twisted here. I love the Bay Area as well. Was fascinated with it. Would go back in a heartbeat. So really cool to see. And I know they have passionate fans out there for sure. Absolutely. It's just cool to see the stuff that was going on in Toronto right now, where their team has finally overcome a lot of adversity. in terms of never quite having the right, I don't know, lineup to make a playoff run, and they've made it to the finals now, and they've actually pulled off a victory in game one of the finals. I love all of that. That's a cool storyline. I mentioned before that I actually really enjoy watching the Warriors when it's the original three Warriors lineup of Steph, Clay, and Draymond. I do like seeing that. So that's also a fun lineup to see. So this is just a fun series. I'm excited about this. But anyway, let's talk specifically about the game here. Game one, it was very, very interesting to me. And it was very weird to see a game where the Warriors really were never actually like in control at any point in the game. You don't see that often with a team that is the most dominant team in basketball over the past several years, and a team that is like the current dynasty in all of basketball. You don't see that very often, but it happened in this particular game, and I think it's very telling that when you look at the box score, you look at that plus minus. If you don't really keep up with the plus minus metric, that's basically all it boils down to is like the impact on the score when that player is on the court. Basically, when the player's on the court, does their team outscore the other team? And it has a little bit to do with the actual impact of the player, obviously. But it also has a tremendous amount to just kind of, express the team's performance as a whole. In general, at least it does when you look at something like what you had with Golden State, where literally their entire starting five had a minus in that regard. Draymond -8, Steph -9, Clay -10. I think that's very interesting. Anyway, Andre Iguodala -8, Jordan Bell -4. Really only one player not at a positive in the plus minus for the Warriors, and that was Alfonso McKinney. So the only logical takeaway here is that Alfonso McKinney should be a starter. No, I'm just kidding. That, in more than anything else, really shows just how strong the Raptors were as a unit, and rattling the Warriors. They did a lot of things right. You flip to the other side, and it's like, Kawhi Leonard took a little while to get going. He had some foul trouble for a little while in there in the first half. He still ended, 23 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, plus 11 in that category. Pascal Siakam, for all of the really, impressive 32 points that he dropped, and people being like, oh man, look at him stealing the show from Kawhi. He's still only not at a +4. It actually was Kyle Lowry and Kawhi Leonard both at +11, and Fred VanVleet, which I'll get to in a little bit, also +11. Those are the ones that really impacted the game in that regard, and I think that's very important to point out. Yes, Pascal's 32 points. Obviously, they're not winning if he doesn't drop 32. If he doesn't shoot 67% from three-point range, it's only 2 of 3, but still, it's more exciting to say 67%. If he doesn't shoot a stupid 82% from the court or from the field in general, Siakam, just a heck of a scoring performance. So only a +4 in that category. So there's something to be said about that. But you see pluses in the entire Toronto starting five. You see pluses from Fred VanVleet. You see pluses from Norman Powell. In only 4 minutes of play. That's not really all that important now that I look at it closer. The only negatives you see a -3 in the 650 that Patrick McCall was on the court. You see a -1 with Serge Ibaka in the 17 minutes that he's on the court. That's important, but otherwise you see just kind of dominance from the Raptors, or not dominance. You see control from the Raptors the entire game, and I think that is very telling for how the game went. You didn't see Golden State do a lot of the Golden State-esque things that we really see. You didn't see them make like the big run. You basically saw Toronto dictate the pace, dictate what the game was going to be like. And that's huge because, in particular, the Warriors beat teams by winning in the third quarter. All right. They just kind of made like a bit of a career. That doesn't make any sense because they're a full team. They've built the dynasty, sort of. They built the team that they are off of winning in the third quarter. A team can hang with them for, quarters 1 and 2, so on and so forth. But when you get to the third quarter, you really see the stamina and the particular style of play with the Warriors. You really see that shine through. That's huge, 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 in particular because they're a team that I think has, they have a lot of star power, obviously, but I think they have a lot of that star power, in particular with those three guys that they are built around, Draymond, Steph, and Clay, because they play a particular style and they play a particular scheme that works, and they have the players around them that work with that scheme, so that when they are missing a Kevin Durant, when they do regrettably have to play a borderline useless DeMarcus Cousins, then they have the scheme that works well in all of that, and part of that scheme is they come out ready to strike in the third quarter. They come out better conditioned. They come out having played a pace of play that wears the other team down. You didn't see that last night. You saw Toronto not just match and control what the Warriors are trying to do in the third quarter. You saw them, kind of outdo them a little bit. In the third, in particular, Golden State. Look at it. Golden State outscored Toronto 32-29 in the third. It was Golden State's best offensive output in the game. They had 21 points in the first, 28 in the second, 32 in the third, and then back to 28 in the fourth. They were trying to push what they normally do and win the third quarter to then go on and win the game. What matters here is that Toronto was not just able to build up enough to begin with, 25 in the first quarter, 34 points in the second, but in that second quarter, they're able to put in a very good 29 points. This series is really going to be determined on whether or not the Warriors can ever get that third quarter explosion going that they normally build so much of their success around, or whether Toronto can match it pretty well. Because 3 points behind in the third quarter is what you're going to have to do in order to hang with the Warriors or beat the Warriors. In this case, they beat them. That's really, really important, I think, because it shows that the Raptors are serious about understanding what it takes to defeat the Warriors. And not a lot of teams, I think, really understand that as well. They try to jump out really hard. Portland, in particular, stood out as a team that really tried to jump out in the first and second and never could weather the third quarter storm correctly. Toronto looks like they're prepared to weather the third quarter storm. And if Toronto wants to have success in the series, they're going to have to do more of what they did last night, and that's try to match the third quarter storm in some sort of way. If they fall off in the third quarter at all, if they ever are outscored by more than 3 points in the third quarter, it's going to spell doom for them, because that gives the Warriors a lot of momentum going into the fourth when the Raptors might be getting tired. In this case, they weathered the storm, they pushed back. The Warriors did not have the momentum going into the fourth that they normally do or feel like they normally do, and it showed. That's kind of the key here. There's another key to it that I'm going to get to in a little bit, but first I'm going to tell you about a weird stat that was presented to me earlier this week that I thought was very, very interesting, and will play into what I'm going to get to in just a little bit. And this stat has to do with a favorite player on the program, Brook Lopez. Brook Lopez this season, I know he's not in the finals, but this is important. Brook Lopez this season was able to notch more blocks in a season than Kevin Garnett ever did in his long and storied career, and made more three-pointers in a season than Kobe Bryant ever did in his great career. All in 1 year, which is fascinating. He notched one more block than KG ever got. He got 7 more three-pointers than Kobe Bryant ever got. Now, the game is different. There's more possessions, whatever. The game is more similar right now to how it was back in like the 60s and 70s, when it was just like go, 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 before physicality and like pace of play changed so much in the 80s and 90s. All of that. The game is like that, so I get that. I presented this so I'm in this Facebook group that a friend of mine from college put me in. That's like a sports debate group. And if you know me, if you know anything about me, I just can't stand hot takes. And I don't care for sports debate shows. I think that I think Stephen A. is an idiot. I think Skip Bayless is a moron. I don't like those shows. I don't like Colin Cowherd. He's not even really on a debate show anymore, but he loves to make hot takes and try to stir up debate. I'm not about that, but it's fascinating to see how people react in this Facebook group. So I stay in it for like research, I guess. So I posted this and I said, here's your super random, meaningless stat for the day. Brooke Lopez did what he did this season. And, for the most part, people were just kind of like, wow, that is so weird. And it's super random. And also, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean anything. And part of why I said this, and I said this to the group, was, yeah, it's really funny to look at because there's some people that would put that up there and be like, see, KG and Kobe are both overrated because people are stupid. And that was like, the main thing. That was the main reason I shared it with that group. There was one guy in there who clearly did not think it was funny that I posted this, and said something about how he wasn't going to engage, and because he didn't want to deal with the, I don't know, what did he say? Something about the haters, I think. I kid you not. He's like, people just coming into this group just hating. And I was like, there was no hate here. Even though I did joking, I said completely facetiously as a joke, oh yeah, this obviously means that I would take Brooke Lopez over Kobe Bryant or Kevin Garnett any day of the week. So that was the whole joke. He didn't take it well. The reason I point out the whole Brooke Lopez thing is that it shows the importance of going after particularly good specialists and role players in order to build a team. The current landscape of the NBA is very superstar obsessed, and it makes sense. I mean, superstars sell tickets, so that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to argue against anybody that tries to tell me that you need to have superstars on your team. I mean, I might look at this, at least mild success that the Atlanta Hawks and Denver Nuggets have had over the recent years, in which they didn't necessarily have superstars, but they had a bunch of really good players that fit specific roles. That's key. I want to talk a lot about players fitting roles. I think that we overlook role players a lot in the NBA because of the superstar obsession. And before I go any further, I do want to point out, obviously I know Brooke Lopez is a former All-Star. He was the centerpiece of the Knicks not the Knicks, sorry. My apologies to all New York and New Jersey-based basketball fans. He was the centerpiece of the Nets for a while, and I totally get that. I feel like he has become a bit of an afterthought in the NBA in his last couple of seasons. I mean, he is, 31 years old? Which is funny to me because I really thought that that he was, like, older than I am, but he's not. But, he had the year with the Lakers that was kind of underwhelming before he was shipped off to Milwaukee, and now he's really fitting in well with the Bucks organization and fitting that role very well. And his role in the Bucks organization is obvious. He's supposed to be a rim protector and then stretch the floor a little bit more, because the Bucks are, and here's something I talked a little bit about in that episode with Gray Barnes earlier in the week, the Bucks are kind of the spiritual successors to the old Orlando Magic, Dwight Howard style of play. Instead of having a center and a bunch of three-point shooters based around it, they have Giannis, who is a positionless man, and a bunch of three-point shooters based around him. And Brooke Lopez has developed that three-point shot. What's notable about Brooke is that you go back about 3 seasons ago, his next to last year with the Nets, he attempted 14 three-pointers over the course of the season. And that was it for the entire season, and that was the most he had attempted in 1 year for his entire career up till that point, right? And that's interesting because then his last year in New Jersey, in Brooklyn, he suddenly attempted about 150. Goes to the Lakers, attempts more than that. Goes to the Bucks and had over 300-something attempts this season, making 187 of them, all right? So he's just really developing the three-point shot, but he's all about it now. He's hitting step backs. He's trying to cross people over as a 7'1" awkward man and drain three-pointers in their face. It's fascinating to watch, but he's improving the three-point shot. The Bucks brought him in and gave him the keys to the three-point shooting car and said, "Do it, man. Just take it." We are building a team that is Giannis and a bunch of guys around him that can shoot. Eric Bledsoe, maybe not the best shooter in the world, but Eric Bledsoe is a bit of a spark plug type of player. That's a role in and of itself. So they brought Lopez in to play a particular role, and it led the Bucks to the best, a great record. It led them to the conference finals, and then Toronto was able to pick them apart, all that sort of thing. I think it's very significant to see what Brook Lopez has meant to the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's because he was not asked to be the superstar for them. He's not the centerpiece of that team. He was asked to fit a specific role. And as an aging former All-Star, that's really important. Andre Iguodala does this for the Warriors. He's an aging former All-Star. He's not the centerpiece of the team anymore. He's supposed to be a role player on the team, and he does it very well. The obsession with superstars leads us to believe that in order to be a successful team in the NBA, you have to compile as many superstar players as you possibly can. The only time this has ever really worked is with the Miami Heat's Big Three. And that primarily is because you are able to grab LeBron James and Chris Bosh in their primes and pair them with Dwayne Wade, who was still in his prime. And then you add Ray Allen, who fit a role as an aging superstar, and it suddenly became, somebody who just needed to be their three-point shooter, all of that. He was a role player for them, and he did it very, very well. But that's the only time that it's ever worked, I think, where you compile superstars and build a successful team off of that. It's not a formula that is proven. It's not at all. People are obsessed with it because it worked so well for the Miami Heat, 4 straight finals, 2 championships in that time frame, that people assume you have to have as many superstars as possible in order to have that level of success. Golden State was not that way. Golden State built naturally through the draft. The times that a team has really developed into a dynasty and developed into a major team, they're not built off of free agents and built off of trading for superstars. Toronto, who I'm going to talk about more in a second here, might be the only exception to that I've seen since the Miami Heat. But, Golden State drafted Steph, Clay, Draymond, built a successful team around them. They pulled in Andre Iguodala when he was kind of viewed as being past his prime, and he accepted the role that was given to him, and that was the spark plug that turned them into the dynasty that they are now. But, they were winning a record number of games before Kevin Durant ever got there, before Boogie Cousins decided to ring chase as well. The Warriors built naturally. They built through the draft. That's how foundations are built. Then, once they had the core there, they picked and chose. Is that the proper past tense of picking and choosing? Picked and chose. It doesn't flow nearly as well. The right role players to fill in the gaps around them. They got the guys that were good 3-and-D type players. They got the guys that were lockdown defenders, maybe weren't going to score too many points, but could play good defense, especially play good help defense and fill in gaps. Like if somebody got past Steph Curry on the perimeter, they had the right guys that knew where to slide in, where to cover in the spaces. The Warriors, sneaky good defensive team that people don't give them enough credit. Because they play a particular scheme of defense that covers a lot. It's kind of like an opportunistic. If you watch football, sometimes you have defenses that stifle teams in terms of like the amount of yardage given up, stuff like that. And then you have some teams that know they're not going to stop teams all the time, and they build a defense entirely around opportunistic takeaways. Big play changes like certain blitz packages that are like, high risk, high reward, that sort of stuff. The Warriors are more like that. They're not really just going to stop teams from scoring points, but they're going to make teams make mistakes that the Warriors then capitalize off of, defense that leads into creating offense, so on and so forth. Then the reason they're able to do that is because they have a lot of really good role players there. There's been some really notable free agents that I feel like I need to touch on right now before I get past all this. Like Dennis Rodman, for example, joined the Bulls when he was still in like the prime of his career as probably the best rebounder of all time, pound for pound. The Bulls were established at this point in time, though, so he just became like the third man in the big three at the time. But the Bulls had drafted Michael Jordan, drafted Scottie Pippen, and, had really built a good team around there. They had already won their, 91, 92, 93 championships before Dennis Rodman got to the team in 95. I might have the years a little mixed up there, but they had already done that before Dennis Rodman got there. So adding Dennis Rodman was not like a piece to lead them to championships. He just, was put into an already successful team to make them even stronger. It's like the addition of Andre Iguodala to the Warriors. It's that kind of comparison. Shaquille O'Neal going to the Lakers from Orlando. That's a big-time free agent move. This is a little bit different because at this point in time, the Lakers were not quite as established. They had not been as good in the entirety of the 90s as they were in the 80s and very early 90s when they still had Magic and the Showtime Lakers, all of that. And this is a bit of a special case because, Shaq only really moved as a superstar, only really moved over to LA because there was some sort of rift that had developed in Orlando. So it's a little bit different because that they were able to basically pick up a player in his prime and build around him while the rest of the team was not star players yet. You had Eddie Jones starting ahead of Kobe Bryant and all of that sort of stuff. So Shaq didn't really go and join another superstar. Shaq went to be the centerpiece of a team that was building around. So it's not quite the same as chasing the superstars. Chauncey Billups went to the Pistons as a free agent. Chauncey, I don't think, was ever viewed as a superstar during the course of his career. Criminally underrated player, I feel like, looking back. But he was his arrival really sparked that Pistons semi-dynasty of the early 2000s when they took took the reins from the Lakers and kind of pulled off those upsets. So those two in particular, Shaq and Chauncey, are the two that pop into my head instantly of times that chasing a superstar, paid off well for the teams versus building through the draft and all of that. But those are different than what is going on these days in the NBA, because these days in the NBA, the belief is that if you don't have 2 or 3 superstars, you can't win at all, and that's just not the case. The only time I've ever seen a team that just goes after all the superstars and wins it all, really was the Miami Heat. It was the only time we've ever seen it. It's not a formula. Teams are trying to replicate it as if it is a formula. It's not. It just happened to be a bunch of friends who decided, it'd be a lot of fun to dominate the league together for a little while. Let's try to do that while we're still in our primes. And they did. You can't replicate a bunch of people just wanting to be friends. I don't care if Kawhi Leonard leaves Toronto, goes to LA, and is suddenly with LeBron James. It's not going to be the same because they don't have the same chemistry, camaraderie that they had that LeBron had with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. It's just not. It's not the same. It's not a formula. If that worked, then throughout the entire history of the NBA, teams would be scrapping their entire franchises and trying to recruit all the superstars all at once. And that's just not the case. Maybe you scrap a little bit in order to bring in one superstar who happens to be, a free agent or whatever. But it just very rarely happens. Most of the time you get trades, and that's how you get your guys. I mean, look at Toronto. Toronto's a great example of building off of superstars, but doing it through trades, not trying to recruit free agents, all that sort of stuff. They're a weird team. They're a weird case. I'll talk more about it in just a second. But superstars sell tickets more than anything else. It's the actual championships really are built upon finding, identifying, and signing the role players that fit the scheme, fit the style with the superstar. I think the Lakers of this year are a great example of having a team that did not fit the style of the superstar they went after, and that's one of the reasons that they, fell apart, that they just did not have any, level of success right there, is because so much of what they were trying to do, they were building an entirely different team around, Brandon Ingram and Kyle Kuzma and Lonzo Ball. Then they just try to plug LeBron James into that. And I do think LeBron is the best player in the world and one of the greatest to ever play the game. But you do have to have players that fit, around LeBron James to make that work. That's the case with any superstar. You can take the same team and you plug in Kevin Durant, and suddenly, the Lakers aren't doing, quite the same, because they, it's a different style, a different scheme of what they're trying to do. So anyway, you have to have the right pieces around the superstar in order to actually win anything. Robert Horry will always be the biggest example to me of like the right role player doing what he was supposed to do in order to help his team. I mean, the man won 7 championships with 3 different teams because he was the type of guy who, just did what he was supposed to do to help the team get better without having to be the star player. I get that. I guess with his younger years with the Rockets is where he started. For some reason, I drew a blank on that for a second. I think his younger years, maybe he was more of like an all-around star player or whatever. But, even by the time he got to the Lakers, that was not his role. But he was a key accessory that played well with the others to help them win some of the titles that they won. Then he goes to the Spurs. He does the exact same thing. He's a great accessory piece. He plugs the gaps. He fills the gaps. He plugs the holes that the Spurs needed him to, and he wins more titles there. He's the best example I've ever found of a player that just fills the gaps well. And because of that, has a lot of success. Role players, you can't diminish the value of those sort of role players. Milwaukee knew this with the team they were building. They knew their team was centered around Giannis, and they went after players that just would be good accessories to that. Yes, Brook Lopez is a former All-Star, but he's not the same player that he was when he was 23 years old. And they knew that, and they went after a player not because of the name on the jersey, but because of what he did to fit the style of what they were trying to build. Toronto and Golden State have those. Look at how huge Fred VanVleet, at an undrafted free agent that they picked up, look how huge he was. Look at how huge Danny Green is as a 3-and-D specialist for them. When he's on, they have success. When he's not on, they're just not going to have the same level of success. Look at the roles that Jonas Jerebko and Jordan Bell, and heck, let's not forget that they picked up Andrew Bogut. The Warriors picked up Andrew Bogut right before the playoffs. All that. Let's not diminish the roles that they play and how well they fit the schemes and how well they complement the superstars. And that's why the team tends to have so much success. If they had other role players that didn't complement Steph, Clay, Draymond quite as well, then you would have the Warriors of, the early years of the Splash Brothers, where it was incredibly entertaining to watch, but it was not successful. You would have, to an extent, you'd have the issue that the Rockets are having to deal with, where their style does not seem to lend itself to long-term and especially playoff success. And part of that is because they just don't really have the right role players around them. As Gray Barnes pointed out in our episode earlier in the week, they don't have like the Trevor Ariza, type of player anymore. They don't have that. You have to have those types of players, those types of role players who will help you win titles. Or actually, I wouldn't even say will help you win titles. You have the right role players, you win titles. That's just how it is. Superstars are going to bring, put butts in seats. Superstars are going to help really appeal to free agent role players that you want to gather and put onto your team, But if you don't have the right role players, then it's just not going to actually lend itself to success. And then that leads us to the Toronto situation where they built their team via trades and picked up superstars, or at least, stars through trades, and kind of tries to buck the system that I've been building up this entire podcast. Because they did not draft Kawhi Leonard. They did not draft Marc Gasol. They did not draft Kyle Lowry. And yet here we are. The players that they did draft, they've, shipped away. They're building teams unnaturally. And that's a little tricky. But they're still building a team, not by necessarily chasing after a huge collection of superstars. You could argue that Marc Gasol is still a superstar talent and that he's still one of the best centers in the league, but he's getting older and Memphis was not building around him anymore, and Memphis needed to get rid of him, all that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure where Marc Gasol stands in terms of superstar status any longer. I don't know how highly he's regarded by a lot of teams, but Toronto still has a lot of success based around the performance of guys that I just mentioned. Danny Green being the 3-and-D specialist when his shot's on. It's a major, major difference maker for the Toronto Raptors. Fred VanVleet, when he comes in off the bench to be kind of a spark plug, do-it-all, hustle-time guard, that's huge. His performance is crucial to. I mean, heck, when they have a Serge Ibaka, who I think people would just assumed was washed up and never panned out to be what he was supposed to be, when he seemed to be the centerpiece of one of the centerpieces of the Oklahoma City Thunder back in the day. When he puts in that ugly, gritty, workman-like performance, it lends itself to the success. It's those types of players that are really, really huge to the success of the Toronto Raptors. And yes, Kawhi Leonard gets all the headlines, but Marc Gasol has to be good like he was in Game 1 in order to lend themselves to a successful performance. Kyle Lowry has to be good. He dished out 9 assists last night. Only 7 points, but 9 assists, 6 rebounds. Oh, that's nice. That's all key stuff. Pascal Siakam and Kawhi Leonard are the faces of the franchise at this point in time. It's not Kyle Lowry's team anymore, but Kyle Lowry seems okay with that. He has to keep stepping up as more of a role player than anything else in order to continue having this sort of team success. I think that's really, really important. I mean, he's a 33-year-old point guard at this point in time. He has been in the league for... how long has he been in the league now? Gosh, he was picked in 2006. So he's been in the league for 12, 13 years now. He's not the centerpiece of the Toronto Raptors organization. He understands that, I think, or at least is accepting that. And if he keeps filling the role as the veteran, as the former star who is learning how to be a role player a la Andre Iguodala, a la... Andrew Bogut, when he first went to Golden State, when he was no longer the centerpiece of the Bucks. It's that sort of, you have to have those role players in there. You have to have, Marc Gasol is getting there as well. Marc Gasol is very, very important. Oh yeah, Marc Gasol is 34, so you know that he's not viewed as being, he and Lowry are not in their primes, but they're still very, very good, and they're still very much the type of players that are smart enough to adapt to being quote-unquote role players as like the former superstars who are now adapting to a different style and a different role. And that's huge. You got to have the role players to have a successful team in the NBA. For Golden State, the title would not be won because of Boogie Cousins or Kevin Durant magically getting healthy again. I mean, it might be won because KD gets healthy. He is... obviously one of the best players in the league. You just kind of have to account for that. That's its own special case, whatever. No, the Golden State would win a title this year around the core of players that they drafted years ago in Steph, Clay, and Draymond, and then surrounding them by guys like Jordan Bell, who is, a low post / stretch 4 defender, a very highly athletic and quick big man you have to have in the NBA these days. The veteran Andre Iguodala, who's like, typically off the bench. He started in Game 1, but, his main role is to be willing to come off the bench and be like kind of a spark plug, hustle player, fill the gaps type of player. And he does that role so well. All those role players that they've picked up to complement and fill the gaps with the superstars. That's what the Warriors are going to have to rely on. Toronto's going to have to rely on, yes, obviously Kawhi Leonard and Pascal Siakam, the two, big-time players in the franchise. Actually, let's talk about Pascal for just a second, because if we're talking about building a team naturally through the draft, and that's how most success is actually generated in the NBA, not through trying to chase superstars and all that, Pascal is their drafted player who's developing into a star. And you can't overlook that. So anyway, just had to jump into that real quick. But if Kawhi and Pascal are going to get all the headlines, Toronto's title chances are going to rely fully on Kyle Lowry, Marc Gasol being those veterans past their prime, slipping into more key roles as opposed to being the stars. Danny Green, Fred VanVleet, Serge Ibaka filling the gaps. They're going to have to rely on that. That's what, if Toronto wins a title, it will not be because of Kawhi Leonard and Pascal Siakam. It's going to look that way. The headlines are going to say that it is. That's not the case. If they win the title, it's going to be because Kyle Lowry shows up. It's going to be because Fred VanVleet was able to, rattle the Warriors' second unit. It's going to be because Serge Ibaka was able to stretch the floor a bit. It's that sort of thing. We get blinded by superstars a lot of the time. And I get that. And superstars are amazing. And obviously, I do think that you can't win a title without a superstar. Otherwise, you don't have Michael Jordan on the Bulls, they don't win titles. You don't have Nikola Jokic on the Nuggets, then they aren't the team that they are. You don't have a star player in Atlanta, then that all-star starting five from a few years back doesn't actually accomplish much of anything when it matters. You got to have it. Big names are great, but titles are won or lost by the players that surround the big names. Otherwise, Cleveland and J.R. Smith would have had more success, right? And I think that's important. I don't think that you can ever overlook having the right role players on your team. All right, that's going to wrap up the fast break here on 40 Minutes of Hell. And I will say, on a very personal note, while that just wish for an entertaining series more than anything else, I do also completely selfishly hope, beyond hope, that DeMarcus Cousins never wins a title. All right, I'm your friend Joseph Craven. We'll see you next time. Enjoy these NBA Finals. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll touch base with you again next week here on 40 Minutes of Hell, presented by Running Out the Clock Sports. Pay attention. Stay tuned. Summertime's coming, which means ROTC is going to ramp up its fall college football SEC podcasting schedule very soon. Team previews coming out from the ROTC crew before you even know it. I'm Joseph Craven. I've already said that. Bye, guys.